Good morning, everyone. And I've been asked to speak to you today about topic of putting gender to work, or more accurately, putting gender into our work to make our humanitarian assistance that much better. But before I do, I'd like to share a little confession with you. In the days that were building up to this talk, I was extremely nervous, and I had been looking at all these TED Talks on the internet, and I was desperately trying to think of a joke to share with you to make you laugh and like me and listen to what I have to say. And really, I was very, very, very desperate to do this. But a very good friend of mine told me that I've been working in the UN for too long and it was a lost cause. So I apologize for that. Okay. But pretty much that's the frustration that I feel when I have to talk about gender. And like other people who work in this field, many times we're faced with the rolling eyes when the word gender gets put on the table. And this is my job to do it. And it's very frustrating on a daily basis. But that being said, I think this is an important moment for me to reflect on the 17 years that I've been working with the United Nations, to think, why do I feel this frustration? Why is it that I continue to do it? And maybe through my academic studies, I can have a bit of a critical perspective. And really, jokes aside, it is a very difficult thing to take yourself out of your comfort zone. I've been working in the UN for 17 years. I feel very comfortable in this environment. But really, to reflect and think and take myself out of that, to rethink how I do things. What is the language that I'm using? And more importantly, beyond the words, what is the discourse? What is it that I'm doing? How am I doing it? And am I doing the kinds of things that I should be doing to achieve the results that I'm trying to achieve? How would you define me? Am I an activist, like Sitza? Am I an advocate? Would I be considered a practitioner or a professional? And what I would say is probably I am a combination of all of those things at different times in my career span over 17 years. I started to work with UNDP, moved on to UNIFEM, and now I'm working with UN Women. And I would say that it's really a difficult task to be taken seriously. When I'm sitting around a table where decisions are being taken, I have to show that my organization is capable of discussing a wide range of issues, but I have an additional task. I have to always put gender firmly on the table for discussion as part of all of the issues that are being discussed. And that is something that is leading to my frustration. I do it. I do keep talking about it. And it's not so that I can say, yes, I can tick off my box and say, I've finished my to-do list. My job is done here. I do it because I think it's the right thing to do. And it's the smart thing to do, not just for me, but for everybody that is sitting around that table. And today I would like to share with you some of the thoughts that I have had in reflecting back on my years of work. So, the questions that I would put. Aside from the fact that we're expected to do it, does engendering humanitarian assistance actually make sense? I think from my introduction, you have a sense where I would lie in the argument on this issue. But I think more pertinently, if it does make sense, which I feel that it does, why are people so reluctant to deal with it? I will not have answers for you that are ready-made, but I will hope that through the example that I can talk through, that this is the sort of thing that we are all expected to grapple with, and the more we do the thinking about it, the more likely we are to find answers to these questions. I'd like to do the reflection based on a situation that we were faced with at the beginning of 2009 after a 23-day Israeli military operation against the Gaza Strip, which was known as Operation Cast Lead. Now, generally, we are a development organization, but due to the magnitude of the situation on the ground, we were expected to engage in the humanitarian response to the crisis on the ground. As you can imagine, humanitarian action really kicked into gear, and many organizations became engaged. Now, this action translated very much into the technical term is known as post-conflict needs assessments, which basically means that organizations step in and try to get a very quick assessment of the situation so that they can decide what kind of humanitarian action is needed. This, I will really iterate, is done with very, very good intentions. And there were very good efforts at coordination. But what tended to happen was that every organization started to do its own assessment, focusing on a particular sector or a particular issue. And really, the discussions in these assessments became very technical. And because the approach was what we call quick and dirty, just go in there, get the information very quickly, it focused very much on dealing with service providers, or local organizations that are providing services to the population. But really, nobody was talking to the population that was affected. You can imagine within this environment, when we're trying to put the term gender on the table, lifting our hand, we were completely blocked in what we're trying to do. We grappled with the multitude of documents that are available by many organizations about how to put gender into humanitarian assistance. We took all the information, we simplified it, we made it look pretty, we disseminated it, we advocated, we did everything that we thought was possible, but absolutely our message fell on deaf ears completely. So, what were we going to do? We decided to have a moment of reflection as an organization about what we were going to do. What we were trying was not working. So, what I'd like you to do is to reflect with me on the situation at that moment. If you think about 23 days of war from sea, land, and air, you think about within a small area, 1,000 people had been killed, over 5,000 had been injured, and about 100,000 people had been displaced. And this was coming after a period of time that was spanning over 18 months of complete blockade of the Gaza Strip, where no development assistance was coming into the Gaza Strip and there was no movement into and out of. So really, when you're thinking about the crisis, it was not just in that moment. It was as a result of things that had gone on before, and the political situation was likely to continue. So immediately, the flag goes up that this is a little more complicated than we had initially thought. And what I would say to you as humanitarian actors is, try to stop thinking of yourselves as saviors and benefactors. I think, we should try to imagine how it feels to be standing in the shoes of the people that were affected. What do they think and how do they feel about what's happened to them, what happened to their families and community? How has their life been affected? If they can change the situation, what would they change and how would they go about changing it? And I don't think that it's a far stretch for all of you to imagine that depending on whose shoes you're in, the answers to the questions would be different. And that's precisely what we're trying to talk about when we talk about issues of gender and humanitarian assistance. You have to humanize, but to humanize, you have to imagine that people are different depending on their sex and depending on their age and on various other factors as well. So, now that we had done this reflection, which was very good, how are we going to go about it? We had to find a way. And we had to find a way so that it's just not another assessment that we can add to the list of assessments that have been produced and people will look at it and it's very nice and put it on the shelf nicely. One of the first strategies that we used was to involve as many people as possible. Focusing on the humanitarian sector, we worked with all humanitarian actors who were interested in working with us. And for us, this was a way to advocate with them on the issues, but it was really important to also have some sort of ownership and buy-in for them, which meant that whatever comes out of this assessment, they're much more likely to use in their own work. They can design the assessment itself, but then what comes out of it, they can inform their own programming with. We also decided to involve people who are outside of the humanitarian field, because it is very important to understand that there are people who've been doing work before the humanitarian crisis, the current humanitarian crisis, and who will continue to work after the humanitarian assistance has been provided. So there has to be a dialogue between them. This made people very happy. We decided not to create a new coordination mechanism, but to use whatever mechanisms were already there to bring together the humanitarian and the development. And basically, this was in a way able to help us maximize the strengths of each of those realms that we work within. We brought together the gender advocates with the humanitarians in particular sectors. So basically what we were able to do is to bring gender analysis, or the glasses, as a previous speaker has said, to the technical issues within a humanitarian cluster. So both parts were learning. The humanitarian actors were learning through how to see things through a gender lens, and the gender advocates were learning about the constraints, the very real constraints on the ground in dealing with humanitarian issues. We definitely wanted to look at numbers. Numbers are something that is tangible, something that people can hold. It's somehow compelling. People can use it as evidence. And you can get attention with numbers. So we really wanted to see what the numbers are telling us. But really, what we wanted to do and make others do is dig a little bit deeper. Because human beings cannot always be represented by numbers. We need to be able to see their faces, to be able to stand in their shoes. So the first part, when we looked at numbers, we did a phone survey, and we did that, and it works in the context of the occupied Palestinian territory, but in no way am I saying this is the way you're supposed to do it. It worked because people felt more comfortable in the period right after the war to talk in some sort of anonymity. And it also overcame the obstacles we had in movement and access of the people to collect the information. The phone survey provided the numbers, which tell a very interesting story. And we tried to use this really to see this as very compelling evidence to get people interested. So we produced all kinds of tables. We produced the graphs. We produced really nice looking charts. And we wanted that to be in the hands of people, and it did serve a purpose. They did become interested. And once we drew them in, we were able to dig a little deeper with them. And even numbers can tell really interesting stories. In this particular case, although there was a significant portion of people who were receiving food aid, half of them were not happy with the food aid that they were being provided with. And their dissatisfaction was not only about the quantity of food, which might be limited by the amount of resources that you have to dedicate to this. It was also about the kind of food that was being provided. And here, the message is that even in the immediate assistance that you provide, small changes can have a big impact. So we have to have the flexibility, and we have to have the information upon which to change what we do to make it more effective and to really be reaching the people that it needs to reach. But more importantly, how do we see the human beings? How do we look at the human face? We did that through focus group discussions all over the Gaza Strip with different groups of the population to really go deeper into some of the issues that came out of the phone survey. And I cannot go really into the rich amount of information that came out of this, but I'd like to highlight some of the issues that I hope give some sort of insight to what can be done. You can imagine in the period after the war, there was a lot of trauma. And when humanitarian assistance kicked in, there was a lot of support that was provided to children to help them deal with the trauma of war. This is what you would call psychosocial assistance, which is very, very, very admirable as an intention. But then I would ask you the question, who is accountable for a woman like Hanan? Hanan was expressing her frustration at seeing these kinds of programs being provided for young children, but then nobody was thinking about the mothers who were sitting there who also felt compelled to express their feelings about what they went through in the war. Or even Salim, his 64-year-old father, who felt that men should have these kinds of programs. But if we don't have this kind of information, then how can we again tailor our assistance? And it will not require a huge amount of resources to do it. It just means we use the available resources there, but we expand the scope of what it is that we're doing. From this, I'd like to focus on another key issue that I hope that you will leave this talk at least carrying a thought in your head about. I'd like to talk about Asma, who at 26 years old is left as a war widow and a mother of 5 children. She says about her father-in-law, "When the assistance comes for us, he makes sure he escorts me to the bank, and after I've signed all the papers, he takes the money and puts it in his pocket. I can't do anything about it. I'm scared of problems and scandal, and more than anything, I keep quiet so that I can keep custody of my kids." Her story, I hope, illustrates how important it is to understand the complexities of gender relations. If we really want to change people's lives for the better, we need to think beyond the here and now. This is an issue that was there before. It's about power and control, but it affects the situation that we're trying to alleviate. Gender is entrenched in people's experiences of a crisis, but it's also entrenched in how they experience our assistance. So we have to act with awareness. Otherwise, we will not be able to help the people that actually need the help. And if we cannot be part of a solution, then we should definitely not be part of the problem. We should not be exacerbating a problem of this kind. Our imperative is to do no harm. And the last thing I'd like to say in this is that the humanitarian actors should always be working in hand with those organizations that are there for the long haul, the local organizations, the international organizations that are working for social change and justice. Do not see it within the restricted form of a 12-month project cycle. You have to think about what was there before, and you have to definitely think about what you want to see happen after. All in all, I would say that it was an amazing learning experience. I think all the organizations that were involved learned something from the exercise, and they have a sense of ownership over the surveys that were done and the assessment and how we used the results of that. But would I consider the work being done? And I would answer you, not at all. Absolutely not. Maybe we've made a small change among other practitioners, advocates, the professionals, the activists. Maybe they think a little bit differently. Now maybe they see the human face of their work. Perhaps instead of seeing always the same face, they're seeing the face of a father who's trying to get fuel for the household, or a girl that's trying to get to school, or a mother that's trying to find a job. So if we revisit the questions very quickly, we can say that putting gender into our work, again, I will reiterate, it is the right thing to do. Never forget that human rights and human dignity are basic principles in humanitarian action. And it's also the smart thing to do. Remember that one size does not fit all. If we want, in this day and age, with dwindling resources, to make our aid more effective, we have to take these issues into consideration and make sure that our aid is reaching the people that it needs to reach. In terms of why, if it's such a good thing to do, it's not being done. Well, I think this is a term you're going to hear a lot about today. You have to face the fact that humanitarian assistance is very complex. And gender itself, dealing with gender, is just one aspect of that complexity. But it's already a complex situation. It helps you to understand the complexity a little bit better. I would also say, don't be afraid to problematize your work. Look at who you are, how you're coming into this arena, what is the organization that you represent, how much are you able to change the discourse. It's a jacket that we wear. I represent the UN. It's something I'm very aware of wherever I go. But it should never be a straight jacket to what we're trying to do. And always keep in mind what is the end result that we're trying to get to. And in a nutshell, what I want you to go away with is that if we're focusing on humanizing what we do, then we cannot do it without genderizing everything that we do. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you.